Welcome to the Nuances podcast, where wisdom is power is more than just a motto.
It's our way of life. While we don't claim to have all the answers, we're dedicated to delving deeper into different topics through meaningful conversations. As a duo, we bring different viewpoints to the table, enriching our joint journey towards growth and poise.
Join us as we explore and unlearn to relearn while striving to navigate life with poise. Do you know someone who often finds themselves in situations where they're hurt or offended by an action or something that someone said to them, and it wasn't that other person's intention to hurt them or offend them?
Yeah, I could think of at least one person.
Yeah, so that's kind of like what is labeled as a sensitive person, or at least the cons of being a sensitive person, where you're easily offended and hurt. And I think I said this comment to you maybe like a couple weeks ago, where a lot of people with big hearts tend to be sensitive. Because I saw something online saying you want a girl with a big heart, but then when she has all these emotions, you're like, you don't know what to do with it. You don't want that part of it. But it's kind of like what we discuss pretty often, like everything comes with good and bad. So with people who are overly caring and overly loving, like they just have a big heart, or they empathize and sympathize with people, they can often be sensitive, because sensitivity is not just on certain aspects of things. Like if you're a highly sensitive person, you're a highly sensitive person all the way around.
You see, I would disagree with that.
Yeah?
I think people are sensitive by topics or themes and not necessarily genuinely sensitive about everything.
I can see that. I think it depends though. I personally think there's different type of sensitivity. I didn't research this or anything, but when I think of sensitivity, I think of people, how I just explained, where they're just tapped into their emotions. So because they're sensitive in a general way, they then feel a lot of feels, if that makes sense. And then there's what you're talking about, which I can understand that too, where it's more so I'm sensitive about this topic because I'm triggered or I'm wounded here, or something occurred before in this area and now I don't know what to think of it. You know what I mean? So I think there's different type of sensitivity.
You had said to me before that you think I'm sensitive. Why is that?
You?
Yeah. I have a response. That's why I'm asking.
I mean, because that was years ago. I don't know if you're talking about recently or like when we were like talking.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it was that far in the past, but point is you've said it. Yeah. And I want, now that we're discussing this, I want to get a better idea as to why you thought or you think that I am, because I always had the opposite perception of myself, and I'll explain why.
Yeah. In the past, the reason why I said you were sensitive is because you were. I'm joking. I'm not, but I am. You were sensitive in the sense like you didn't like being wrong. And it wasn't like you didn't like being wrong, like don't tell me what to do, but you were often sensitive on topics where I was correcting you, or I was telling you you were doing something wrong, or you could be doing something better. I think you had a difficult time taking constructive criticism from me, which is interesting because we had a previous episode where we talked about how like I could be highly critical too. So I wonder if I could have just been being highly critical as well, on top of you having a difficult time taking constructive criticism, and there was maybe just a little clash there that made me view you as a very sensitive person. But now I would still say you are sensitive, but probably not in that exact same way. I think you've grown.
The reason why I ask is I've always received the opposite feedback as far as whether it's at church or work or even in school. I've always been told that I take criticism very well. Like it just bounces off me. I just try to take the whatever they're telling me, try to improve on it, and then move on. But for some reason, it was always different with you.
Yeah, I was just about to say that. I think it depends on who it's coming from.
Yeah, and that's why I don't label myself as a sensitive person. But even till this day, certain information coming from you, I am more sensitive to than compare with someone else.
Right.
But when you first said this to me years ago, I was highly offended on top of being offended.
With reason, though. I don't mean to cut you off,
Yeah.
but I shouldn't have said that.
No, but I mean,
we were having a conversation,
I'm
but
still,
at the same time, like, you don't tell a man that you think who's sensitive that he's sensitive just like that. Like, you know what I mean?
I can see why you're saying that, but I'm still glad you said it. It just became an opportunity to grow because I never understood that disconnect. How could I go out into the world and I hear one thing and then I speak to the person that I'm most close to and I hear the opposite? But like I was saying, I think it shows how even till this day, I'm still very sensitive to what you're saying. And when you first told me that, I was highly offended on top of being offended.
Right.
Because I thought you were calling me weak.
Yeah, I remember that.
So I didn't have the vocabulary or the understanding to know that just because you're sensitive doesn't mean that you're weak.
Right.
And I think that's something that men deal with every day is I know I'm feeling triggered or a little sensitive, but let me hide it or let me not show it because it's going to come off as me being weak.
Yeah, I see that. I think it's because in that aspect, there's emotions involved. And we know how y'all do with emotions. It's either you guys completely brush it off or it comes out in a different way. So I think because the triggers make you emotional, right? So like the offense that you're feeling, I think a lot of people don't know what to do with that offense. And like we've been discussing across multiple episodes, we often don't understand where certain emotions are stemming from or why it's making us feel that way. But I think once you do understand it, it kind of brings clarity and it's not on some, I'm weak. Like right now in your space in life, you don't view sensitivity as weakness, but obviously there are people who do because of the emotional aspect. I think there's just negative stigma when it comes to emotions and men and sensitivity. And that's why a lot of times it equates to weakness.
There's one person in particular I'm thinking about, and I think you'll know who I'm talking about.
I think I already know based on looking at your face.
I used to think he was very sensitive. And I'm not going to say who, just out of respect.
I mean, why would we? Yeah, never.
But I used to really label him as sensitive. Like I would have a hard time just having a tough conversation with him. But even as I was, we're talking about this episode, I immediately reflected on him and thought that, wait, there are certain things that I've told him before that he had a pretty good reaction on. And of course, there's other things that I've told him and I felt like he really went off the rails with this. So again, it showed me that maybe people are not just generally sensitive, but they're sensitive about a specific topic. But even that word sensitivity, I'm like, how do you even define that? Because some people, you bring up certain topics with them or you say something to them and they might get angry. I honestly don't always label that as sensitivity. Sensitivity, in my opinion, is more so if I'm having a conversation with you and you get so emotional that you don't want to continue or you don't want to hear what I have to say. That's when I label it as sensitivity. Not saying it's right, of course, but how would you define sensitivity?
I mean, I feel like I kind of did, but okay, well, when I think of a sensitive person, I think of someone who is very in tune with their emotions. I actually think I'm sensitive. I feel like I've said this to you many times, but I think I'm sensitive in the sense that like I feel a lot. And it's not just like I feel for me, I feel for those around me. I feel for, my loved ones. I just feel like I'm a feeling type of person. So I label myself as sensitive, but I've also been able to distinguish the difference between when I'm being the sensitive where I'm just in tune with my emotions and I'm sensitive to what people are feeling, or I'm sensitive to what someone's saying to me or what someone's saying to another person, versus I'm currently in a state of offense right now. I'm offended by what someone's saying, whether that's they're saying something about me that doesn't align with how I view myself, or they're saying something that I'm thinking is rude, or they're saying something that's probably not even a big deal, but because of my perception of how they think of me or how they may treat me, so on and so forth, I then create like a story in my mind. So I think there's different type of sensitivities. So like the example you gave, I think that person, it's often offense. And that's why it depends on the topic.
So if you get offended, you're sensitive about it.
That's a form of sensitivity. Like you being overly offended. Like if I tell you something simple and you take it out of context and I tell you that that wasn't my intention when I said it, but you like created this whole story based on how I said it, when I said it, what I said, so on and so forth, but that wasn't my intent and that wasn't how it was done or said, that is a form of sensitivity. That's a form of sensitivity that may be triggering you from like a past experience or a thought that you already have. I'm trying to think of like an example that would make everything I'm saying make sense. Like for example, let's say I have a family member who I often feel like doesn't show up for me, right? This is just an example. I'm making it up. Let's say I have a family member who I feel like never shows up for me. I keep on reaching out for them to show up and they don't show up. There's a family member that hardly shows up for me, in my opinion. I feel like they don't show up for me. But I also have a history of thinking that I am not appreciated or loved by those around me. Now, this person, in their mind, they probably think they show up for me. They're like, I visit every now and then, I check in, I this, that, and the third. And now there comes a point where I want to meet up with that person. And I'm like, these are a few dates. I'd love to meet with you. It's been a while, so on and so forth. Let's meet up. That person is unable to meet any of those dates. And I take offense to it because of what I'm already feeling. That's a form of sensitivity because that's not the person's intention. They may just have those days booked. They may be working, but they can't make the dates that I'm requesting for them to make. Right. And I go further by like assuming that, oh, I give up on this person and this person doesn't care, so on and so forth. That is a form of sensitivity. That's sensitivity in the sense of it's a wound. And because of the wound that I already have, I'm now running with a story that's not quite what it is. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the example that you're giving, I think it's more so that type of sensitivity where there's certain things in their life that still has wounds that are undealt with. And so when you bring up those topics in a way that could already be a little offensive to someone, because who wants to hear that like they're wrong or whatever the case is, right? It then may cause the person to be dramatic.
Yeah, I'm glad that you said that because that's how I interpret sensitivity in my mind is if I say that I'm sensitive about something, it's because I'm wounded. So I try to trace it back. Like this is years ago. We weren't nowhere near engaged or married or anything. And I forgot what we were discussing, but I looked at a message that you sent and I read it and I was highly offended. But to be honest, I was already offended before I even read the message.
I wish you remembered what the message said.
And it wasn't until I responded that I looked back and I saw that you didn't say anything like I thought you said. Yeah, like I just misread it. But I was so in my emotions that I saw something that wasn't there like it was there. That's one of the dangerous things about remaining sensitive. I don't think there's any problem with being sensitive. But what I believe is going on in society today is everyone is sensitive, everyone is wounded, and we're taught to, if someone offends you, cut them off. You're not exactly treating the wound. You're just cutting off.
Running away from it.
Right, running away from it.
Yeah, only for the next person to have
and
a
you think
situation with you.
You think that by getting away from it, you're healing yourself, when in reality the wound is still there. You know, you haven't really treated the wound. So I'm glad that you said that because I think the more men become in tune with their emotions, the more they realize that they're wounded. And I think that's where the disconnect begins, where we don't exactly know How do I deal with this? And I'm not one to speak on or give any kind of advice because I'm still honestly dealing with it. A lot of times my method is like I just said, simply just cutting things off. Like if I'm hurt by something, then common sense tells me just cut it off. I don't know exactly how to deal with the wound. Yeah, with the hurt. Yeah, which is confusing. Growing up, I always heard women say they want a sensitive man. I'm like,
really?
Yeah, you
Where'd
never
you
heard
hear
that?
at?
I've always heard that.
Well, you grew up in a different area of Queens. I don't know.
No,
I've never heard that.
There was actually a movie. I forgot the guy's name. I think it was Brendan Fraser. He played in some movie where they laid out the ideal man, and one of the categories was sensitivity.
Forgive me, is Brendan Fraser? What race is he?
He's white.
Okay. No, I literally did not know.
He's the one that played the Mummy Returns.
You know, I do not remember names for nothing. But
point is, even from that movie, I remember thinking that women always said that they wanted a man that was just a little sensitive. In the movie, they took it too far, where they made him too sensitive. But millennial women want a man that's in touch with his emotions. That's sensitivity.
I grew up hearing the complete opposite. And I've told you this all the time. I've heard women say, I don't want a man who's going to cry, not even on the wedding day. Like, unless his mom dies, then it's like, okay, pass, kind of. Like, that's legit the type of things I've heard.
But that's for women who want traditional man. I'm talking about for like...
No, it's not for women who want traditional
man. So even a modern man...
I've heard this from all type of women who don't want a sensitive man. But again, it goes back to us not being aware of what's what.
Yeah.
Because like you just said before I started speaking, women want emotionally in tune men. If he's emotionally in tune, he's not going to be. And I think that's the thing too. We say this all the time, vocabulary and understanding it, right? We're going through sensitivity and what it means to us and how there may be different forms of it. I think it's important to look at that too. So when you say you want an emotionally in tune person, that doesn't necessarily mean he's sensitive. That means he's in tune with his emotions. Like, because when you throw the term sensitive, obviously in society, that's not what they're thinking. They're not thinking emotionally in tune. They're thinking what we discussed in the beginning of this episode. It's someone who's always offended by everything. It's someone who may be a little dramatic. It's someone who's emotional. Emotionally in tune doesn't mean that though. So it's important to kind of like clarify, well, what's your definition of this term? And what do you mean when you say you want someone who has that?
Don't you think you can't be emotionally in tune without being sensitive, but you can be sensitive without being emotionally in tune?
Yeah, I do actually.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. Like, people who want men who are emotionally in tune, he's going to be a little sensitive.
I agree. But what I'm telling you is most people don't understand that because we don't look at vocabulary and clarify what these terms mean. Because when you go out there, let's say you go out there and you're talking to a group of people and you be like, yeah, he's mad sensitive. They're not going to think, oh, he's so in touch with his emotions, he's emotionally in tune. No, you automatic, at least for me, if I'm not thinking of like all the definitions that I know right now, I'm thinking of a man who's emotional. There's a difference between emotionally in tune and emotional. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's what I'm trying to say. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying if you go out there and just say a statement like that, that's not how society's going to take it. Reality. Like, people associate sensitivity as a negative, unfortunately. And that's the point of this episode, is to make people realize like there's different types of sensitivity. And is it wrong for men to be sensitive? Is it wrong for people to be sensitive in general? Because we often say it as a negative thing, not even pertaining to just men. But when you tell someone like, yo, you're mad sensitive, you're so sensitive, it's not perceived as a good thing. But what I was looking at was some of like the pros of being sensitive. And it's like some of the ones that I mentioned earlier, like being kind, caring, able to pick up on the feelings of others, aware of people's needs and behave in a way that helps them to feel good. Being sensitive helps you respond to the environment and the people around you. It also is like a basis of sympathy and empathy. So all those things are great things, but unfortunately, when you're not aware of definitions, you associate it with what society has told you it is. and sensitivity has been told, at least in Black culture, has not been labeled as like a good thing, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not a bad thing.
To be sensitive?
No, as far as the way it's labeled in general.
Why? How so? Why do you say that?
Because I'm thinking, like, you see how I'm sensitive with you?
Yeah.
I think it's great.
Yeah, I'm your wife, so it makes sense.
But if I was as sensitive with you, or even just a little bit less sensitive, but to the outside world, I think it would be a problem.
You would be like too vulnerable.
Yeah, that's why I'm like,
Yeah.
maybe society's view of sensitivity is actually a good thing.
I see that, but the issue is that because we learn these terms in just the negative form, it prevents people from actually being sensitive with the right people. That's the point. Like we've had an episode on vulnerability. We've talked about expressing ourselves. And while you're only sensitive with me in that sense because I'm your wife, obviously, there are people who can't do that with their wives because of what was labeled as sensitive and how they may view the term sensitivity, or a masculine man not being able to be sensitive. So that's why I want to point out that there's pros of sensitivity. It's all about knowing how to navigate through the emotions that come with being sensitive.
Yeah.
Because like I was saying earlier, I think I'm a sensitive person. And in the past, I would probably just be offended by constructive criticism, or I don't react when someone says something to me, but I go home and I'm constantly thinking about it. That's a form of sensitivity. But as I've grown and learned to understand that I'm a feeler, I'm an empath, so I've learned to navigate through it by understanding it and then learning how to control it and knowing who is allowed to experience that from me.
When you say who's allowed to, you basically mean who's allowed to trigger you.
No.
So what do you mean?
I mean, who's allowed to see that sensitive side of me, not the offense side. See, we got to be clear about what type of sensitivity we're talking about. Sensitivity does not look one way. So in the case I just said, I'm talking more so the pros of sensitivity. Not everyone's going to see that side of me because not everyone deserves that side. You know what I mean? And I think it's the same way when it comes to men, and when people ask questions like, can masculine men be sensitive? If I'm thinking of the definition of the entire term, absolutely they can be. But if we're focusing on the negative aspects of it, or the aspects of it that is more on the side of like you're reacting out of hurt, then that's a different story.
If I had to put it in simple terms, I would say to the question, can masculine men be sensitive? It would be yes, but only in private. Because I don't believe men should be showing too much emotions on the outside world. And it could be because we know how we look at women who, will do things like cry at work or get angry at work. Like that's something that always confused me. Maybe there was just one time I was really upset at work. And
you cried?
No, I didn't cry.
Oh.
No, I never cried at work.
I don't know the story.
No, I never cried at work.
Listen, that don't sound like
9 to 5. I'm here. At 5 o'clock hits, I'm gone. Like no, I don't really.
You mean like you got upset,
offended? Yeah.
Like offended. Okay.
But when I've seen it happen to other people, I've always been confused. Like, where's your control? And I guess that's what I'm getting at. Is I feel like
control.
People who show their sensitivity have
that extent.
Yeah, to that extent in public. Have a lack of control. There's nothing wrong, I think, if you go home and you say, this is what offended you, or this is what happened today, and you're in your emotions, that's totally fine. But I don't think society needs
to see that
from a man's point of view. That may sound be controversial, but
you think so? I actually don't think it's yeah, it could be. Probably because I agree with you. Like I really do think masculine men should be masculine men. That doesn't mean that you can't show emotion. I think it's all about being able to stabilize those emotions. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's nothing wrong with, because you're human. So if you're offended, but it shouldn't take you out of character.
Right.
I think that's the difference.
Yeah.
And that goes for all genders, in my opinion. It's not even just a man thing. I think in general, when we're in spaces that aren't safe spaces, we should be able to control ourselves and not step out of character emotionally, because like you said, it shows that there's a lack of ability there to maintain yourself or to control yourself. So how would you say someone should deal with a sensitive person? Sensitive in the sense of being offended by everything, or taking things out of context in that way. Like, how would you say a woman should deal with a man who's in that space? Because what I think with men who are not showing sensitivity in the positive ways, they often end up showing sensitivity in the negative ways. So when you have a man who's showing sensitivity in the negative ways, obviously there's a lot that he needs to unleash that he hasn't found a way to do so in a healthy way. So now it's coming off as egotistic and you don't tell me what to do, what I'm doing is right, or every little thing you say kind of like hurts him or offends him in a way, anger, so on and so forth. So what would you say to a woman who's dealing with a man who's in that space? Like, how does she deal with a quote unquote masculine man that is sensitive but isn't aware that he's sensitive? Because I think that's what usually happens.
Yeah, you ever hear that the most dangerous type of animal is the wounded animal?
Yes.
Like, you can't just approach it any kind of way because
they're on defense.
Right. And
right.
I think it applies the same thing when in a relationship, where if you're with someone who's always easily offended or gets angry, then they're clearly wounded. The wound is probably fresh, or at least still fresh, and just learn how to approach the topic, approach the situation. Because I think society views men as you're supposed to be strong. So sometimes a woman will go to a man and be like, hey, toughen up. That language will work if it's between two guys.
Right.
But if I'm coming to you, or if I'm around you and I'm sensitive and you tell me to man up, it's going to mean something completely different. So just be careful how you approach just the topic, what language you use. Show him that you're there for him. Like, I've shared this story with you before, but there was a particular time when I was in school and I didn't really know what to do. I was really wounded because I had this vision for my life, like everyone does. And you had asked me a question about school, and I told you, don't worry about it. That was literally my statement. It was rude, and you asked in a nice way, but I was so on edge that's what I said. Sometime later, you approached the same situation, and then you told me, it's okay if you don't know. Because at that time, I honestly felt like less than a man, because I didn't have a job. I didn't have, a whole bunch of things. So I felt like you were coming at me, looking at me like, what are you doing with your life? Why would I want to be with someone like you if you don't even know what you're doing with school? So my instant response was to just shut it down. But when you showed me that, no, I'm not judging you for being in this situation. I'm telling you it's okay. I never forgot that, because it was the moment where I felt like I could really open up about that topic. So I would say the same thing. Just show them that you're not against them, you're not judging them, but you're on their side, and remind them that they're human. It sounds silly, but sometimes just being reminded that you're human and you're not supposed to always try to be a superhero or the greatest guy around, that's enough to cause someone to start the healing process.
That's good. I love that. I think that's where we're going to close. Thank you for spending your time with us. We hope you gained some knowledge today that'll promote poise in your life. We have new episodes uploaded every Thursday right here, same place, same time. Until next time, you can follow us on Instagram at Noir Poise Podcast to stay connected. That's NOIRPOISED Podcast. We'd love to hear your feedback.
And remember, your wisdom is power.